in an old, pretty interesting book, well, not in it, but this has this title, Passage to Modernity. I guess in it. In this book, the author, Louis Dupre, talks about the difference between the modern mindset and the pre-modern outlook. Sorry, I just had to pause to plug in my laptop. So in that book, Passage to Modernity, Louis Dupre talks about a passage from a pre-modern to a modern outlook. An outlook that dominates the way that people think from classical period right through to what we might call the Enlightenment, or at least sometime after the end of the Middle Ages. And what we want to do now is to begin to understand that earlier outlook. It affects everything. And what we're going to do is we're going to focus on how it affects the understanding of language, and how an early understanding of language really shapes Western culture and makes the notion of the word really, really important and determinative. So to do that, this week I want to look at 3 little readings, and the first of those is from a book by a guy named Hans Boersma, and the book is called Heavenly Participation. And I just have asked you to read a few pages of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to put on a split screen and ask you to follow along with the screen right there. I'm going to assume that you have done the reading and that you can bring up the reading for yourself. And I'm just going to walk us through a few pages of this. And I suppose if I need to, I can do this, right? I can point to pages that way. Okay, so I asked you to read pages 21 to 24 of this little book, and I just want to take us through that now and highlight a few things. Okay, so we might as well start with the word mystery. This is the emphasis of the first 2 chapters. Sorry, the first 2 paragraphs. And let's just remind ourselves of this, that there is a sense of mystery that is important to what this author wants to get at. He says he's distinguishing between, mystery in a kind of meaningful philosophical or theological sense, and mystery as it is used in, say, something like the writing of a murder mystery. And he gives us a pretty good definition here that I want you to take on board. Mystery referred to realities behind the appearances that one could observe by means of the senses. That is to say, though our hands, eyes, ears, nose, and tongue are able to access reality, they cannot fully grasp this reality. Well, that right there is really what the author wants to emphasize, that we understand reality, but we don't understand all of reality. We don't fully understand reality. And it's interesting that though this is it's a theological book that this guy has written, that he appeals to a poet to talk about that. The reason for this basic incomprehensibility of the universe was that the world was, as the poet Gerard Manley Hopkins famously put it, charged with the grandeur of God. Now, whether you're a religious studies person or a literary person or what you will, maybe we can latch on to that idea that the world is charged with the grandeur of God. Now, Hopkins is a 19th century poet. He's living after the shift to modernity, but he is someone who retains this earlier outlook. Primarily interested in those who just more ordinarily inhabit this earlier outlook. There's people who live in the time, even before Augustine, who lives in the 4th and 5th centuries. So this idea of the world is charged with the grandeur of God. Just hold on to that. Now, let's back up and look at the start of this paragraph. That he's already used in the heading, Sacramental Ontology. He then puts that phrase in quotation marks, and he also talks about a Platonist Christian synthesis. So just notice those two phrases, Sacramental Ontology, Platonist Christian synthesis, because they're going to occupy us over the coming weeks. Okay, let's turn over the page. Now, the next paragraph is just, I think what's really going on in this paragraph is he's not abandoning what he just said. He's thinking that it's going to get tougher here. I think what's going to get tougher in this paragraph is that he's going to make the move from using the word mystery to using the phrase sacramental ontology and the word sacrament. And I think maybe what is making him slightly, anxious in this paragraph is how we're going to understand the word sacrament. Now, some of you, most of you maybe, I don't know, might think of sacraments in terms of the Catholic Church. You might think of sacraments as, it's pretty well known that the sacraments, that Catholics have 7 sacraments. Things like the Eucharist or the Lord's Supper. Baptism is another one. And then there are 5 others. Holy orders, marriage, confirmation, the anointing of the sick, and let's see, what's the 7th one? Let me just look at my little list here. Oh yeah, reconciliation, forgiveness. Okay, so there are these 7 sacraments, but that's not what he means. It doesn't exclude those, but he's after a more general philosophical idea. And by sacrament, he simply means this idea of something that is not fully explained in and of itself because it is charged with the grandeur of God. It belongs to something bigger than itself. And the word itself, and the notion of something being itself, is problematic and can be challenged. And that's what he wants to do here. Okay, so in the second paragraph, he makes the move from the word mystery to the word sacrament. And one wants to be careful not to latch on to that word sacrament in a narrow and technical and sevenfold kind of way. All right. The other thing that I want you to notice from this second paragraph is that he gives us that nice, elegant little definition of a very serious word, the word ontology. So this is on page 22. It's the second paragraph, and it is just 5 lines from the end of the paragraph. So when I speak of my desire to recover a sacramental ontology in this book, I am speaking of an ontology, brackets, an understanding of reality, close brackets, that is sacramental in character. So we want this word ontology. It's terribly important for the purposes of this course, for thinking about theology, philosophy, language, the way people are together, the meaning of the past. It's terribly important for all of that. Technical word, but we can demystify it here a little bit. An understanding of reality, okay, the nature of the real, something like that. Okay, so we've got this word mystery, we've got this word ontology, or sacramental ontology. Now things ramp up a little bit in the third paragraph. And what matters most is this little diagram, right? But let's notice some of the terms that he uses along the way. He gives us an illustration of a sign of a deer at the side of the road that makes the driver aware that there are deer nearby, lurking in the woods, perhaps ready to bounce out across the highway. One of my earliest memories growing up in Manitoba is of the family getting into an accident when Dad hit a deer on the road. It's the old thing, a deer in headlights. Smashed the black Pontiac that we had. I was like too young to really know or care about this car, but it was the family car. And what I do recall is that this was the end of the road for that car. It was a pretty serious accident. Tragic for the deer, of course. So this sign, he uses the idea of a sign that is separate from the reality. The reality is that the deer are in the woods, and there's a sign that's pointing towards that. And what he wants to do is he just wants to use this as an illustration for a certain way of thinking about the relationship between signs and things. And he uses at the start of this paragraph, he uses at the start of this paragraph the word symbolize. A road sign with the silhouette of a deer symbolizes the presence of deer in the area. And then later, right at the bottom of the page, he says, it is not as though the road sign carries a mysterious quality, participating somehow in the stags that roam the forests. In diagram 1, symbol X and reality Y merely have an external or nominal relationship. Can you just tuck that word away into your memory, because it's going to come up for us later in the course. A nominal relationship. It's going to develop into a philosophy called nominalism. And the idea is that signs are separate from the reality to which they point. Now, he uses this example, and it's kind of tricky for me to teach this because he's using it as an example, but he doesn't really believe in it. What he really believes in is the other situation that he is going to describe. And in this other situation, what he's saying is that the sign and the reality to which they point are related. So in some sense, in this other way of looking at things, all signs participate in a greater reality. It's true, there is no flesh and blood deer in the sign of the deer, but there's another sense in which even a piece of wood that's vertical with a yellow, what is it? It's a square, right? That's turned on its turned on angle. There's a sense in which even that reality is not self-contained, is not just its own reality in and of itself. It participates in a larger reality that is the whole of the created order. And that's what he's getting at in the second image. And he uses that word, puts it in italics. He uses the word participates. It's an old word. We're going to see it. We're going to see it in one of the other readings even today. Things are different with sacraments. Unlike mere symbols, sacraments actually participate in the mysterious reality to which they point. And again, be careful. He's not just talking here about the 7 Catholic sacraments. He's talking about a sacramental ontology. That is an ontology, a view of the real in which everything participates in something that is larger. Not to put too fine a point on it, everything participates in the reality that is God. And we're going to see that God is understood differently by, in classical civilization, by pagans, by Christians. It's understood differently. But there is still a notion of something like being, God, the good, the divine cosmos, etc. So he uses the word participate, and he also uses third line from the top on page 23. Sacrament X and reality Y co-inhere. The sacrament participates in the reality to which it points. Okay, so we've got the word mystery, we've got the word sacramental ontology. In this paragraph, we've got a contrast between the notion of a symbol and a sacrament. A symbol, in the way that it's being used in this reading, is nominal. A symbol doesn't connect or doesn't belong to the reality of which it is a symbol. If your mindset, if your ontology is different, you might well believe that the sign itself is part of the reality to which it points. And this is, in fact, always the case for people of this different ontology. What does that mean? We're going to take time to figure that out. But coming to grips with this opens up a completely different way of thinking. It means that the way you talk, the way you dress, the way you conduct yourself, the way you comport yourself in the world is not just self-contained, is not just you yourself manipulating signs or manipulating clothes or manipulating the way you are. It is always already carrying with it something more than you yourself control, because you, your clothes, your language, everything is charged with the grandeur of God. It's a pretty cool concept, and it opens up a different way of thinking about language, communication, how we are with one another, therefore how we organize society and how we do a whole lot of things. Okay, there's one more paragraph here, and what Boersma does now is he appeals to another author for this idea, and specifically for the opposition between the word symbol and sacrament. He refers to an essay written by C.S. Lewis called Transposition. And again, I think there's there's some things about this illustration that are, I don't know, maybe a little bit difficult, or for me, they're a little bit unclear or troubling. But the basic point, I think, is essentially clear. Lewis talks about the symbolism of spoken words and written words, that each of them is self-contained. The written characters exist solely for the eye. The spoken words solely for the ear. There is discontinuity between them. One is for the eye, one is for the ear. That notion of discontinuity is, I think, probably the most important thing here. It's like the idea of a nominal relationship, a break, like again, the left-hand side of the illustration, a break between X and Y. And he says the pictures are different. If you have a picture of a light, if you have a picture and there's a sun or a lamp that's in the picture, and it shines, well, it shines in the picture, but you can only see it, and its shining quality in the picture depends upon its borrowing. Like if you're not in a room that's pitch black, you wouldn't be able to see the picture. It depends on the picture itself, the world of the picture, participating in the larger world where there's a real sun or there's a real light in the room. So, and that, I think that's a pretty cool illustration. Again, the idea is that in this understanding, in this picture way of thinking, the reality participates in a larger reality. It belongs to it. It can't be separated from it. It is not self-contained. Coheres. So there is a real presence of the real light, the sun or the lamp in the room. There's a real presence of that light in the light that is depicted in the picture. And as Boersma says at the bottom of page 23, this understanding of sacramentality is part of a long lineage. The created order was more than an external or nominal symbol. Instead, it was a sign that pointed to, it does still point, but it also participates in, pointed to and participated in a greater reality. And he goes on in the rest of the paragraph to say that these things are woven together, and to say that the world is mysterious because of this, because of this participation in a greater presence, in the reality, in the reality of God. And just note too that he uses the phrase "the great tradition" to talk about this this outlook. The great tradition. The great tradition is going to be broken, or he's going to use the image of a tapestry. So he's going to say that this great tradition, this tapestry, is going to be cut in the period known as modernity. Okay, that's enough for this reading of Boersma. We can talk about this.